The marble floor gleamed under afternoon light, perfect and untouched, just like everything else in Aleandro Valenti's mansion. Sofia Harper knelt before it, her black uniform hanging loose on her frame, the scrub brush moving in careful circles across stone that cost more than 3 months of her wages. Her knees ached. They always ached. The pain had become the rhythm of her days, morning ache, afternoon ache, evening ache, the steady drumbeat of a body worn down by 8 years of labor and fear. A sound cut through the silence. Not the usual silence of an empty mansion. A different kind of silence. The kind that meant something had broken. "Mama! Mama, he's here!" Emma's voice shattered everything. Sofia dropped the brush. Soapy water splashed across the white tile as she pushed herself up, her calloused hands pressing against the cold stone for leverage. She did not run at first. For one fraction of a second, she stood frozen, listening to her daughter's scream echo through the garage below, and in that moment, every cell in her body recognized the sound of danger the way prey recognizes the shadow of a predator. Then she ran. Her worn white sneakers slapped against marble, then hardwood, then the concrete steps leading down into the garage. The echo of her footsteps followed her like an accusation. Sofia had spent 8 years trying to disappear, trying to make herself small enough that the world would forget she existed. Now she was running. Now she was making noise. Now she was announcing her location to everyone who might be listening. Emma stood in the garage doorway wearing the faded purple jacket Sofia had found at a thrift store, the one that still had a tear along the seam despite Sofia's careful stitching. The 8-year-old's face was streaked with tears, her small body shaking, her eyes wide with the specific terror that only a child who has known violence can recognize. Behind Emma, blocking the exit completely, sat Douglas Hale's truck. The vehicle was rusted red, the color of old blood, and it took up the entire opening. Douglas himself stood 6'3", with the broad shoulders of a man who had spent years breaking things, bottles, furniture, bones. His forearms were thick and heavily tattooed, the kind of tattoos that cost nothing but meant everything in the places where he had earned them. His fists were already clenched. His jaw was already tight. He was already wearing the expression of a man who had decided this would be the day everything changed. Sofia stepped between her daughter and this man without thinking. Her body moved before her mind could calculate the danger. She placed both hands on Emma's shoulders and pushed her gently backward, creating distance between the child and the bulk of Douglas's rage. "You need to leave," Sofia said. Her voice did not shake. She had learned, over 8 years, how to make her voice sound steady even when every nerve ending in her body was screaming. "You need to leave now, Douglas." He laughed. The sound was like gravel grinding under a boot heel, like stone breaking apart. "You think hiding in some rich man's house changes anything? You think serving his floors and scrubbing his toilets makes you invisible to me? You're mine, Sofia. You always have been. You always will be." Every word was a weight being dropped onto her chest. Emma's small hand reached up and gripped Sofia's sleeve. The child said nothing. She had learned, in 8 years of her short life, that crying only made things worse. Silence was safer. Invisibility was safer. Sofia's free hand moved to her daughter's hair, a gesture so automatic, so familiar, that it happened without conscious thought. The way a heartbeat happens without instruction. From somewhere above them, from the second-floor window of the mansion, someone was watching. Aleandro Valenti stood motionless in the afternoon light. His suit was charcoal gray, the kind of suit that required a tailor who knew how to work with silk linings and hand-stitched seams. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, revealing the hollow at the base of his throat, the small vulnerable place where a man's neck meets his chest. His dark hair had silver at the temples, not the silver of age but the silver of authority, the kind of aging that happened only in men who had been responsible for life and death decisions. He was 52 years old and looked like he had been carved from stone and left out in the rain for decades. His eyes, though. His eyes were different now. Aleandro watched Sofia's body shield that child. He watched the way her hands trembled but her voice held steady. He watched the way she stood there in a black uniform that belonged to no one but herself, facing down a man who outweighed her by 100 pounds, and something ancient and impossible stirred in his chest. A memory. A child standing in a doorway. His own mother's body between him and his father's belt. The smell of whiskey and rage and the specific coldness of a man who had decided his family existed only to absorb his anger. He pressed the radio button on his desk. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath. "Where are we?" Vinny's response came back immediately. Vinny had worked for Aleandro for 15 years and knew the sound of that particular tone. It was the tone that meant decisions had been made. 15 men positioned around the perimeter, boss. All exits secured. We've got him boxed. Secure the woman and child. Bring them inside. Yes, boss. The radio went silent. But in that silence, everything was about to change. Downstairs in the garage, Sofia was still standing between her daughter and Douglas. She did not yet know that above her head, in a mansion worth $12 million, a man had just issued an order that would rewrite her entire existence. She did not yet know that in exactly 14 hours, she would be stranded on a highway in the middle of a storm, her broken-down car stalling out in rain so heavy it looked like the sky had turned to water, and that Douglas would find her there, and that Emma would scream, and that everything would come down to whether 15 men in black tactical gear could reach her in time. She did not know any of this. She only knew that Douglas was moving toward her, that his fists were clenched, that her daughter's hand was gripping her sleeve so tight it was cutting off the circulation, and that she had exactly $5.32 in her pocket and no way to run. "We could have made it work," Douglas said, and now he was close enough that she could smell the beer on his breath, the cigarettes embedded in his clothes, the specific stench of a man who had spent the afternoon building up his courage in a dark bar. "If you had just stayed put. If you hadn't gone thinking you were something special. But no. You had to leave. You had to make me look stupid in front of my friends." "I'm sorry," Sofia whispered. The words came automatically now. She had apologized so many times for the simple crime of existing, for the unforgivable sin of trying to protect herself and her child. The garage door rolled open. She did not hear it at first because the sound was smooth, mechanical, almost silent. By the time she registered what was happening, the door was fully raised and men were moving through it. Not one man. Not 3 men. 15 men in identical black suits and black tactical vests, their movements synchronized like they were parts of a single organism, like they had trained together for this exact moment. Douglas turned. His face drained of color. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, fell open at his sides. "What the?" he started, but the words died before they could form. Vinny stepped forward. He was a man of medium height but solid build, with the kind of face that looked like it had been broken and reset several times. His eyes were the color of winter. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Time for you to leave." Douglas looked at the 15 men. He looked at Sofia. He looked at Emma. For a moment, something that might have been sanity flickered across his face, a recognition that he had just walked into something far beyond his ability to navigate. He backed toward his truck. His hands raised, not in surrender but in acknowledgement of the simple mathematics of the situation. 15 men. One of him. A woman and child who were no longer his to claim. "This isn't over," he said, but even he did not believe it. Vinny's expression did not change. "Actually, it is." The truck pulled out of the garage. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, swallowed by the Las Vegas heat and the vast indifference of the afternoon. Sofia realized she was not breathing. Vinny approached her slowly, his movements careful, the way you approach a wounded animal that might bolt. Emma pressed closer to her mother's leg, her small face buried in Sofia's uniform. "Mr. Valenti would like you to stay inside for the remainder of the day," Vinny said. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of an absolute statement. "For your safety." Sofia opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out. She had spent 8 years trying to be invisible, trying to take up as little space as possible, trying to disappear into the margins of the world. Now she stood in the center of a garage with 15 men in black suits surrounding her, and one of them was telling her she was worth protecting. "Come on," Vinny said. He gestured gently toward the mansion. "Let's get you both inside. You look like you could use some water." Sofia took Emma's hand. Together, they walked toward the open door and the cool interior of a house that suddenly felt less like a workplace and more like a fortress. Behind them, the garage door rolled closed with a soft mechanical whisper. In the mansion above, Aleandro Valenti watched them through the security camera feed, his expression unreadable, his hands folded on his desk. In his chest, that ancient memory stirred again, the memory of being small and terrified and protected by someone who understood the specific weight of fear. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had been true. 3 weeks earlier, Sofia Harper had been completely alone. 3 weeks before the garage door closed behind her, Sofia Harper stood in a kitchen that was not hers, scrubbing marble floors that stretched like a frozen lake across the Valenti mansion's west wing. The clock on the wall read 6:23 a.m. The house was still asleep, which meant she was invisible, which meant she could breathe. She wore the standard black dress uniform with white collar and cuffs, her name tag crooked from where she had fastened it in the dark of her car before driving here. Her hair was pulled back so tight it created a permanent ache at the base of her skull, but that was intentional. Tight meant controlled. Controlled meant safe. She was 28 years old but looked 37. Life had a way of adding years to your face when it removed hope from your chest. The October morning was cold in Las Vegas, a bitter wind that cut like a blade wrapped in ice, dead leaves skittering across the marble steps she had cleaned 6 times already, only to have the wind scatter them across the entrance again. She had learned not to fight the wind. She had learned not to fight anything anymore. In the pocket of her uniform dress, folded 3 times, was exactly $5. 3 crumpled single-dollar bills and 8 quarters. That was everything she possessed beyond the clothes on her back and the 2004 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on the odometer. $5 had to last until payday, which was still 11 days away, and payday was only going to bring her $478 after taxes. From that, she needed to pay rent on the apartment she shared with her daughter Emma, $850 a month, and she was already 3 weeks behind. The landlord had stopped returning her calls. On her small kitchen table at home, next to a cereal box filled with expired crackers and a can of generic beans with no pull tab, sat a letter. The envelope was official white with the return address of Berkshire Credit Collections in Memphis, Tennessee. Inside, a single sheet of paper stamped final notice in aggressive red ink declared that she owed $22,000 in medical debt. The amount was underlined twice. Beneath that, in smaller text, failure to remit payment within 3 days will result in wage garnishment and legal action. 3 days. That had been 4 days ago. The debt came from 6 months earlier, from a night she tried very hard not to remember but her body remembered every single second. Douglas had come home at 11:33 p.m., and she knew it was 11:33 because she had been watching the clock, the way she always watched the clock when he was gone, the way she held her breath until he was home and she could see exactly which version of him had returned. That night, he had brought the version that broke things. Emma had been asleep in the bedroom they shared. Sofia was pretending to be asleep on the couch because pretending sometimes made him skip the worst parts and go directly to bed. But he had seen through the pretending. They always did. He had grabbed her by the hair and called her names that made her eardrums ring, and when she tried to pull away, he had shoved her with the full force of his chest. She had fallen backward into the coffee table. Emma had woken up to the sound of her mother screaming, and when Emma tried to catch her, Emma's small arm had snapped in 2 places. The X-rays cost $4,700. The orthopedic specialist cost $3,200. The follow-up appointment and the physical therapy cost another $8,100. The emergency room physician alone billed $6,000. Sofia had no insurance, no savings, no family to call. She had made a minimum wage and tips that never materialized because she was always too tense, too afraid, too visibly broken to inspire generosity in strangers. Douglas had never paid a dime. Douglas had told the hospital that Sofia was clumsy and that she owed him an apology for embarrassing him by needing medical attention. She had reported him to the Las Vegas Police Department 7 times in 8 years. The first officer who came was Detective Marcus Ramos, a man with a thick neck and small eyes who had known Douglas since high school. Ramos had taken her statement with his hand on his belt and his expression suggesting he was bored. The second time, Ramos had told her that Douglas claimed she was exaggerating. The third time, Ramos had actually laughed, a sound like gravel in a garbage disposal, and said, "Lady, Douglas says you're clumsy. Maybe you should be more careful where you walk." The rest of the times, she had stopped reporting. Reporting had a way of making things worse. The scars on her back formed a geography of violence. Cigarette burns in 3 places, 1 on her shoulder blade, 2 along her spine. A belt mark that had scarred in a perfect line from her left hip to her ribs. The ridge of scar tissue on her right shoulder where Douglas had thrown a glass bottle and the jagged edge had caught skin. She hid all of it beneath long sleeves, even in the Las Vegas summer when the temperature reached 118 degrees and the other housekeeping staff wore short sleeves and tank tops. Sofia wore cardigans and long-sleeved shirts and kept moving so no one would notice the way she favored her left side when bending. Invisibility had become a skill. At the Valenti mansion, she scrubbed and cleaned and dusted and disappeared. She worked her shift from 5:02 a.m. to 2:11 p.m., 6 days a week, earning $11.50 an hour. No benefits. No breaks. The other staff members, a head chef, 2 assistant chefs, a household manager, 3 other cleaning staff, did not know her name. They called her the scrubber or simply pointed when they needed something moved. She had learned to anticipate needs before they were expressed. She had learned to move through rooms like smoke. Aleandro Valenti moved through those same rooms like a man who owned not just the building but every atom of air inside it. Sofia watched him from a distance, always from a distance, the way you might watch a panther at a zoo, beautiful and lethal and utterly incomprehensible. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that filled his custom-tailored suits. The suits were always black or charcoal gray, made of fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light. His white dress shirts were open at the collar, revealing the smooth muscular expanse of his chest and a gold chain so thin it was nearly invisible. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and a scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his jawline, thin and white and old. His eyes were the color of winter storms. He was approximately 35 years old. He wore a Rolex watch that cost more than Sofia made in 3 years. She knew this because she had once looked it up on her phone during a lunch break that she did not take because she could not afford lunch, and the watch was listed at $47,000. His rings were solid gold. His shoes were leather so soft they must have been made from clouds. Around him were always men. His core men, the ones she heard the household manager call his security team. Vinny was the tallest, with a thick Brooklyn accent that made Sofia think of old movies and danger. Gino was smaller but moved with the precision of a chess player calculating 3 moves ahead. There were Marco and Enzo and Salvatore and others whose names she never learned. They wore black suits and kept their hands visible and their expressions neutral. They spoke in low voices about things Sofia did not understand. Shipments. Territories. Money moving through channels she could not imagine. Allegiances and debts and things that required absolute silence. One morning, she had overheard Vinny speaking to Gino in the hallway near the library. "The Denver operation is running clean," Vinny had said. "But there's chatter about the Phoenix distribution. Someone's skimming." "How much?" Gino's voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. $17,000 last month. Maybe more. A long silence. Then, find out who. And make sure they understand that theft from the family is theft from him specifically. Sofia had kept her head down and continued scrubbing the marble. She had learned that knowing things you were not meant to know could be dangerous. Better to be invisible. Better to be forgotten. Better to simply exist in the margins and hope that no one remembered you were there. But what she did not know was that Aleandro Valenti had already noticed her. He had noticed her in the way a hunter notices the smallest movement in grass. He had seen the way she held her left side when she bent to clean, as though her ribs were still healing from something. He had observed the bruise on her collarbone that makeup did not quite conceal, the yellow-green tint of healing violence. He had noted that she never ate lunch, not even once in the 3 months she had worked here, and he had heard his chef mention that she had declined the staff meal every single day. He had asked Vinny to find out her name. Sofia Harper, Vinny had reported. 28. Lives about 6 miles from here in a studio apartment with her daughter. Works here and picks up shifts at a diner called Mirage on Boulder Highway. She makes about $1,800 a month and has $22,000 in outstanding medical debt from a child's emergency room visit 6 months ago. The debt is being collected by Berkshire Credit Collections. They're being aggressive. Final notice went out 4 days ago. Aleandro had asked one more question, the bruises. Vinny had hesitated. Sir, I can't confirm, but there's a pattern. She flinches at sudden sounds. She always covers her skin. And there's a man named Douglas Hale who has been to her apartment multiple times. Police records show he lives there occasionally, but there are no official reports filed against him. Aleandro had closed his eyes. He had not spoken for a very long time. When he had finally opened them again, Vinny had backed away, because he recognized that particular expression. It was the expression Aleandro wore when something needed to be destroyed. Sofia was working on the marble floors in the west corridor when she heard the sound of a truck engine outside, aggressive and loud, the kind of sound that did not belong on a morning in the Valenti estate. It was 1:02 p.m. Her shift was ending in 13 minutes. She was thinking about whether she could afford to stop at the food mart on the way home and buy rice or if she needed to stretch what was already in her cupboard for one more day. The sound of the truck grew louder. Then it stopped. Sofia stood slowly, her hands in the bucket of soapy water. She did not know why she stood, exactly. Some part of her that had learned to sense danger the way animals sense earthquakes registered that something was wrong. Downstairs, near the garage entrance, a voice began shouting. A man's voice. Deep and angry and familiar in a way that made her entire body contract like a fist. Douglas. Sofia's hands began to shake so violently that water sloshed from the bucket onto the marble. She heard footsteps. Running. Multiple footsteps moving fast. Voices raised in command and authority. And then, cutting through everything, a sound that turned her blood to ice. Emma's voice. Her daughter's voice. 8 years old and terrified. Mommy. Mommy. Sofia moved without thinking. She dropped the bucket. Water splashed across the white marble and she did not care. She ran toward the sound, her heart in her throat, every nightmare she had ever had suddenly becoming real. She was already moving when she heard Vinny's steady voice, clear and cold as winter. No one enters this property who the boss does not invite. The sound of a truck door slamming. The sound of boots on concrete. The sound of a child crying. Sofia reached the top of the stairs just as the garage door locked beneath her, and in that single moment, suspended between two worlds, she understood that everything was about to change. Sofia's hands trembled as she stood on the balcony, the November wind cutting through her thin black dress like a blade wrapped in ice. Below, the estate's floodlights illuminated the front gate where Douglas's truck sat idling, its engine a low growl that made her stomach contract. 15 men in tactical gear moved in perfect formation across the grounds, their black suits blending into shadow, surrounding the perimeter with the precision of soldiers sealing a fortress. Aleandro descended the marble staircase without rushing. His footsteps echoed through the cavernous hallway, measured, unhurried, each step a declaration. By the time he reached the security office, Vinny had already activated the main gate's intercom. Douglas's voice crackled through the speaker, slurred and desperate and dangerous. Sofia. I know you're in there. You can't hide from me, baby. Come out here and we can talk about this like adults. Aleandro didn't respond. He simply gestured, and Vinny cut the audio feed. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. In the guest room upstairs, Sofia had left Emma asleep under covers that cost more than 3 months of her old rent. The child's breathing was steady, peaceful, the kind of sleep that only comes when a child finally feels safe. Sofia had watched her for 5 minutes before stepping onto the balcony, unable to bear the weight of her own gratitude, unable to understand why this man, this powerful, terrifying man, had chosen to shield them both from the storm. Now that storm had arrived at his gates. Aleandro moved into the security control room where 6 monitors displayed different angles of the property. Douglas stood outside the gate, his large frame silhouetted by headlights, and 4 men stood beside him, rough-looking, wearing the uniform of small-time muscle. Their jackets hung loose, and Sofia recognized the telltale bulge of weapons on their ribs. This wasn't just a jealous ex showing up drunk. This was an escalation. Vinny's voice was steady. "Boss, we've got confirmation. 2 of those men were arrested for assault in Henderson last year. Charges dropped. The other 2 have trafficking priors, both dismissed due to lack of evidence. They're not professionals, but they're dangerous." Aleandro studied the monitors for exactly 3 seconds. Then, has he made contact with anyone inside the property? "No, sir. And we've got the perimeter secured on all sides. Front gate, back entrance, utility corridors, roof access. If a bird tried to land on this estate right now, we'd have its wingspan on file." Aleandro nodded once. He picked up a phone on the desk, black, heavy, made before cell phones existed, and dialed. The line connected after 1 ring, which meant someone had been waiting for this call. Aleandro's voice, when he spoke, was different than it was with Sofia. It was stripped of any pretense of civility. "This is Valenti. I'm calling to confirm that the case file I discussed with you 3 days ago is priority. Yes, trafficking operation, active in 3 counties. The primary subject is currently at my property attempting intimidation. I have him on closed-circuit surveillance. I'm giving you 30 minutes to position units discreetly. No sirens. No drama. Understand? Good." He hung up. To Vinny, "How many men do we have at perimeter?" 15 stationed. Another 20 on standby in the secondary compound. Keep them in position but standing down. No confrontation. Douglas stays exactly where he is until the authorities arrive. He thinks he's negotiating. Let him keep thinking that. On the balcony, Sofia heard none of this. She only heard Douglas's voice continuing to rise through the intercom before Aleandro cut it completely. The silence that followed was absolute except for the wind and the distant sound of the estate security lights humming in their fixtures. She heard footsteps on the marble behind her and turned to find Gino, the younger lieutenant, holding a cashmere coat that probably cost $2,000. "Mr. Valenti said you shouldn't be cold," Gino said simply, and he draped the coat over her shoulders without waiting for permission. His gesture was gentle, almost paternal, which made it hurt worse somehow. "What's going to happen?" Sofia asked. Gino didn't answer immediately. His eyes were kind but guarded. "Nothing that you need to worry about. Mr. Valenti handles problems the way other men drink water. It's just what he does." Below, Douglas began to pace. His movements were becoming more agitated, his arms flailing as he shouted things that the muted intercom couldn't quite convey, but his body language made clear: rage, desperation, obsession. Sofia recognized the pattern because she'd lived inside it for 8 years. The escalation always followed the same curve. First the anger. Then the promises. Then, when those didn't work, the threats. She was trembling when Aleandro found her again. He emerged onto the balcony like he'd risen from the marble itself, and without a word, he removed the cashmere coat from her shoulders and draped it around both of them, pulling her against his chest. It was the first time he'd touched her with anything other than formality. His heartbeat was steady, unbothered, the rhythm of a man who had decided the outcome of a situation before anyone else even understood the stakes. "How much longer?" Sofia whispered. 23 minutes, Aleandro said. then he's someone else's problem. And if he comes back? His arms tightened slightly. He won't. The certainty in those two words should have terrified her. Instead, it undid something inside her chest, some knot she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. She allowed herself to lean against him, to pretend for just a moment that the world was not constructed entirely of men like Douglas Hale, that there were other options besides survive or shatter. Below, a siren wailed in the distance. Then another. Douglas's pace quickened. He began shouting into his phone, his free hand gesturing wildly at the men around him. One of them grabbed his arm, and Douglas shoved him away hard enough that the man stumbled. Vinny's voice came through the earpiece clipped to Aleandro's jacket, 3 units arriving. ETA 90 seconds. They're positioning now. Douglas still hadn't realized what was happening. He was still arguing, still demanding, still operating under the assumption that this was a situation where his rage and his connections and his sheer violent persistence could override another man's will. It was a fatal misunderstanding. The police cars pulled up without ceremony, lights cutting through the darkness. 4 officers emerged, and within seconds Douglas went rigid. The realization hit him in stages, first confusion, then understanding, then the kind of panic that comes from realizing the game has changed without your knowledge. He tried to run. Vinny, watching from the security office, made a small noise that might have been amusement. Douglas made it exactly 15 feet before the officers moved, and while they didn't tackle him, the result was the same. He was on the ground. Zip-tied. Being read his rights by a woman officer whose voice carried up to the balcony even from that distance. Douglas Hale, you're under arrest for violation of restraining order, criminal threatening, and conspiracy related to human trafficking investigation. You have the right to remain silent. Sofia's knees gave out. Aleandro caught her, held her steady, his hand splayed across her lower back like an anchor. It's over, he said, and she realized he meant something larger than just Douglas, larger than just tonight. He meant the entire 8-year architecture of fear that had structured her existence. But what neither of them knew was that Diana Whitfield's world was already crumbling. Somewhere across the city in an apartment that smelled like expensive perfume and marital infidelity, the woman who had humiliated Sofia in the restaurant was receiving a phone call from a federal agent. Her husband's campaign fund, they explained, was under investigation. They had documentation. They had witnesses. They had begun following the money, and the money led everywhere, including to her personal accounts. Within 48 hours, Diana would hire the most expensive lawyer in Nevada. Within 1 week, those lawyers would realize the evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. Within 1 month, she would appear on the evening news, face blurred, being escorted from her home in handcuffs. But that night, as the police cars took Douglas away and the estate returned to its careful silence, Sofia knew none of this. She only knew that her hands had stopped shaking. She only knew that Emma was asleep safely down the hall. She only knew that Aleandro Valenti, this man built from darkness and power and vengeance, had chosen to use that power on her behalf. As the floodlights shut down one by one, she finally asked the question that had been forming since the moment his SUV had stopped on that rain-soaked highway. Why? Why me? Why Emma? You could have anyone in this city. Why choose someone like me? Aleandro was quiet for so long that Sofia thought he might not answer. Then, with his eyes still fixed on the darkening grounds below. Because the world looked at you and saw nothing. And I spent my entire life being that nothing before I became something else. I know what it costs to be invisible. And I swore I would never let that happen to anyone while I could prevent it. Sofia turned to face him fully. In the darkness, his face was all sharp lines and shadow, the scar on his cheekbone catching what remained of the light. He looked like what he was, a man forged in violence, hardened by survival, and somehow, impossibly, still capable of gentleness. What happens now? She asked. Now, Aleandro said, you stop running. At 5:24 in the morning, Douglas Hale was led out of his apartment in handcuffs, his face gone pale and slack, his voice breaking like a wounded animal begging mercy from cameras that would not give it. 12 FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded him, their movements precise and practiced, their expressions blank as stone. Sofia Harper watched it live on every news channel, her hands gripping the armrest of the leather sofa in Aleandro's penthouse, her breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. Emma was asleep in the room down the hall. And for the first time in 8 years, Sofia allowed herself to believe that the running might actually be over. But to understand how Douglas Hale arrived at that moment, shackled, broken, his rage finally powerless, you had to go back. Back to the night that changed everything. Back to the highway during the storm, when a black SUV convoy stopped beside a broken-down Honda with a woman and child inside, both of them afraid the world had finally caught up with them. It was 3 weeks before the FBI raid. October in the desert, and the nights were getting colder. Sofia had been driving toward the California border, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, because Douglas had found them again. He always found them. In 8 years of running, he had found them in Phoenix, in Flagstaff, in a motel outside Bakersfield. His network of corrupt local police, his friends in the right places, his absolute certainty that she belonged to him, these were chains made of something stronger than steel. The Honda had died on Highway 15, the engine making a sound like a scream and then nothing. Sofia's phone showed 4% battery. She had $17 in her wallet and 2 days of gas money left. Emma was 6 years old then, still young enough to believe that adults knew what they were doing, that the people who loved you would not let bad things happen. "Mama, I'm cold," Emma had whispered, her small hands shaking. Sofia had wrapped her daughter in the only blanket they owned, which smelled like diesel fuel and old coffee, and waited. The road was empty. The night was so dark it seemed solid, like something you could touch. She thought about walking. She thought about the gas station for miles back. She thought about flagging down the first truck that passed, and what might happen if the driver decided a young woman alone with a child was opportunity rather than tragedy. That was when the headlights appeared, for sets of them, cutting through the darkness in a perfect line. Black SUVs. No markings. They slowed as they approached, and Sofia's entire body went rigid because she had learned to recognize danger the way other people recognize hunger, as something automatic and undeniable. The lead vehicle stopped. A man emerged. He was tall, well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of expensive tailoring and natural power. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples, slicked back with precision. A scar ran from the outer edge of his left eye down to his cheekbone, pale and thin, like someone had traced a path through him with a blade wrapped in ice. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than everything Sofia owned, and a cashmere coat draped across his shoulders that belonged to a different world entirely, a world of choices and safety and people who did not wake up calculating if they had enough money for food or medicine. Aleandro Valenti was 47 years old. He had built his empire from nothing, from the rubble of a childhood so violent that most people would not have survived it. His father had died in prison when Aleandro was 4. His mother had raised him in a neighborhood where the only currency that mattered was loyalty and the willingness to become something dangerous. By 30, he controlled every significant operation from Vegas to San Diego. By 40, he owned pieces of half the city. By 47, when he found Sofia Harper on the side of a highway in the dark, he had not allowed himself to feel anything approaching softness in 15 years. He approached the car slowly, each movement deliberate and measured. Through the windshield, Sofia could see 2 men flanking him. She recognized the type immediately, muscle-dressed in designer suits, men who moved like they had been ordered to move, their eyes flat and professional. "Your engine?" Aleandro asked. His voice was deep and solid, like an oath carved into stone. Sofia could not find words. Emma pressed against her side. It just stopped," she managed. Aleandro did not ask where she was going or why she was driving alone in the dark with a child. He turned to one of the men, the one with the scarred neck and broken nose, and said simply, "Call a tow truck." "No, call Dominic. I want the car here in 20 minutes. "Yes, boss," the man said, and moved away. Aleandro opened the passenger door. "Come with me. You're both cold." Sofia's instinct screamed at her to refuse, to lock the doors, to keep her daughter as far as possible from this man who carried himself like violence dressed in silk. But the temperature outside was dropping, and Emma was shaking so hard Sofia could feel her trembling even through the blanket, and sometimes survival meant trusting the wrong person because staying put meant dying anyway. She gathered Emma and stepped out. The wind cut through her thin jacket like a blade through butter. Aleandro removed his cashmere coat and draped it around both of them. It was warm and heavy, and it smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something that reminded Sofia of safety even though nothing about this situation was safe. Inside, Aleandro said, gesturing to the lead SUV. The interior was warm and clean, with leather seats and a bar and a television screen built into the seat back. Emma's eyes went wide. She had never been in a car like this. She had never been anywhere that looked like it belonged to someone with money. A driver sat in the front seat without turning around. A man named Vinny, Sofia would later learn, who had been with Aleandro for 12 years and knew better than to ask questions. Gino was beside him, younger, mid-30s, his eyes occasionally meeting Aleandro's in the rearview mirror with something like concern. Aleandro sat across from Sofia and Emma, the distance between them perhaps 4 feet. He looked at the child with an expression Sofia could not read. "What is your name?" he asked Emma. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Harper." "I am Aleandro." "You are safe now, Emma Harper." The simple statement, "you are safe," was so far from true that Sofia nearly laughed. Instead, she felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built brick by brick over 8 years of running. She wanted to believe him. The wanting was almost worse than the fear. "Where are you running from?" Aleandro asked. "Not where are you going. Where are you running from?" Sofia's hands clenched in her lap. Emma was looking at her, waiting to see if it was safe to trust this man. "Bad people," Sofia said finally. "Someone who won't let us leave." Aleandro was quiet for a long time. Through the tinted windows, Sofia could see the lights of the other SUVs, the men in dark suits moving around the disabled Honda, their presence like a cage made of tailored fabric and calm competence. "Tell me," Aleandro said. And so Sofia told him. 8 years compressed into sentences. Douglas Hale, who had dated her when she was 22 and thought beauty was the same as safety. His fists, his friends, his absolute certainty that he owned her. The police who looked the other way because he knew them from the academy, because money changed hands, because nobody important enough to listen had ever taught them that women like Sofia Harper mattered. The shelters that turned her away because they were full. The job she worked where tips disappeared to make rent. The grocery store where the manager let her eat old sandwiches from behind the counter and never wrote it down. Emma, growing up in the cracks of the world, learning at age 6 that love meant bruises and fear meant staying quiet. Aleandro listened without interrupting. His scar seemed to catch the light every time he shifted, white and thin and permanent. "What is his name?" Aleandro asked when she finished. "Douglas. Douglas Hale. He's a state police officer, or he was. He has friends everywhere. He has money. He always finds us." "Not anymore," Aleandro said. The words were spoken so quietly that Sofia almost missed them. But Emma heard them. She pressed her small hand into Sofia's and squeezed, as if checking to make sure her mother was still real. The tow truck arrived. The Honda was collected. By 2 a.m., Sofia and Emma were in a penthouse in Las Vegas, 2,000 feet above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the whole world spread out below them like something that could never touch them again. "You'll stay," Aleandro said. "Not a question." "How long?" Sofia asked. "Until it's handled." What happened next was what would later appear on every news channel in Nevada. But it did not happen the way Sofia expected. There was no dramatic confrontation, no scene where Aleandro and Douglas Hale stood across from each other like figures in a classic duel. Instead, there was a methodical dismantling of everything Douglas Hale had built. Aleandro made phone calls. Not threats, Aleandro did not make threats. He had learned long ago that information was more valuable than rage. He knew a federal prosecutor named Margaret Chen who had been watching Douglas Hale for years. He knew an accountant who could trace money through shell accounts and dummy corporations. He knew a woman named Renee who had been one of Douglas's victims, who had never reported it because she was undocumented and terrified, but who would speak if she felt safe enough. Within 48 hours, the FBI opened a file. Within 1 week, they had enough probable cause for a warrant. Within 2 weeks, they had statements from 8 women. 8 different stories. 8 different versions of the same man using his badge as a weapon and his connections as armor. Douglas did not know any of this. He came to the estate on the morning of the 20th day. Sofia was in the library with Emma, reading her a story about a princess who was not pretty but was brave, when she heard his truck engine outside. Her entire body turned to ice. She moved to the window. Douglas was at the gate, alone except for 3 men she did not recognize, their faces hard and professional. He was screaming into the intercom, his voice distorted by the speaker. "Sofia! Get out here now or I swear to God I'll burn this whole place down." Emma started to cry. Sofia held her daughter and felt the familiar weight of 8 years pressing down, the certainty that Douglas always won, that men like him always found a way. She looked down at the marble patio 3 stories below. For 30 seconds, she calculated. It would be so easy to end this. To stop running. To stop being afraid. The night air was cold on her face as she moved onto the balcony, and she thought about Emma waking up without a mother, and the thought made her sick, but the exhaustion was deeper than bone. "Mama, come back inside. Please." Emma's voice, small and scared, pulled her back. Sofia held her daughter and listened as footsteps moved downstairs, measured and unhurried. Aleandro walked to the gate with Vinny and Gino flanking him. Through the intercom, his voice sounded like ice wrapped in velvet. "You're trespassing. Leave now, or my men will remove you." Douglas laughed. "You think you scare me? I've got 4 cops in my pocket and friends in." He did not finish the sentence because he did not know, could not have known, that everything he believed was solid ground had already become quicksand. That at that very moment, 12 blocks away, his apartment was being raided by FBI agents in tactical gear. That the money trails he thought were hidden had been exposed. That the women he believed would never speak were signing statements and giving testimony and reclaiming their own bodies from his ownership. At 5:06 in the morning, they led him out in handcuffs. His face was pale and slack. His voice broke like a cornered animal begging mercy. Sofia watched every frame of it on the news. Aleandro stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, his presence like a shield made of something more permanent than skin. "It's over," he said. And it was. But there was one more piece. Diana Whitfield, the society wife who had publicly humiliated Sofia 3 weeks earlier in an upscale Italian restaurant, who had called her a gold digger and a liar to protect her own reputation, Diana had her own accounting problems. The same accountant who had traced Douglas's money found hers. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Campaign finance violations. $4 million moved through accounts she thought were secret, and every transaction left a trail. The raid came at sunrise. Federal auditors with warrants. Frozen assets. By evening, she was being escorted from her home in handcuffs while news cameras caught every moment. Her husband filed for divorce the next morning. Her social standing evaporated like water in the desert. Both villains destroyed. Not through violence, but through exposure and the relentless machinery of justice that Aleandro had set into motion. That night, as the estate returned to its careful silence, Aleandro found Sofia on the balcony. The city lights spread beneath them like fallen stars. "Why?" she asked. "Why me? Why Emma?" Aleandro was quiet for so long that Sofia thought he might not answer. Then, his voice steady and certain, "Because I spent my entire life being invisible. And I swore I would never let that happen to anyone while I could prevent it." Sofia looked at him fully. In the darkness, his face was all sharp lines and shadow, the scar on his cheekbone catching what remained of the light. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Aleandro said, "you stop running." 1 year later, the November sun touches the Las Vegas horizon in shades of amber and gold, and Sofia Harper stands at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse on the 32nd floor, the strip glittering below like a river of fallen stars. She wears a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her back straight in a way it never was when she was scrubbing marble floors. On her left hand, a simple gold band catches the light. The woman looking back at her from the glass reflection is someone she barely recognizes, not because she is unrecognizable, but because she is finally, unmistakably, visible. The past year has been a careful, deliberate construction of a new life. Her GED hangs framed on the wall of her small office at Valenti Properties, where she manages real estate operations across the Nevada region, earning $67,000 a year. She did the work herself. Aleandro's foundation provided the scholarship to UNLV, but Sofia filled out every application, attended every class, stayed late in the library while Emma did homework in the campus childcare center. No shortcuts. No favors traded on the strength of a man's name. When people meet her now, they do not know her history unless she tells them. And she is learning, slowly, carefully, to tell it. Emma is 9 years old. She attends Oakmorn Academy, where she maintains a 93 average in her classes and spends her lunch period in the library reading books about paleontology and medieval history. The therapist says Emma is processing her trauma through the study of extinct creatures and defensive fortifications. Sofia thinks her daughter is simply brilliant and brave, and she tells her this every morning before school. Emma no longer has nightmares. She sleeps through the night. She laughs at cartoons and complains about math homework and asks Sofia questions about how babies grow in their mother's stomachs, and Sofia answers every question with the kind of honesty no one ever gave her. The penthouse is Sofia's alone, purchased with her own savings plus a mortgage she qualified for on her own credit. 23% down payment. 30-year fixed rate. The bank manager was surprised when she walked in without a co-signer, a woman in her early 30s with perfect income documentation and no defaults. She signed the papers with a hand that barely trembled. When they gave her the keys, she sat alone in the empty living room and wept, not from grief but from the sheer weight of owning something that could not be taken from her because no one else's name was on the deed. The therapy happens twice a week. Dr. Reeves is a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an office that smells like lavender tea. Sofia talks about the 8 years. She talks about the bruises that healed and the ones that took longer. She talks about the night she counted $3.47 in her purse and realized she had to choose between gasoline and groceries. She talks about Douglas's hands and the sound they made when they hit. She does not cry during these sessions anymore. The tears came in months 3 through 7. Now what comes is clarity, and clarity is stronger than tears. The scars on her back have not disappeared. They have simply stopped being something she hides. Last month, she wore a sleeveless dress to a real estate conference in Phoenix, and no one stared, or perhaps people did stare but Sofia did not notice because she was too busy listening to a presentation on sustainable development in the southwestern urban corridor. The scars are part of her history, not her identity. This distinction took months to understand. At exactly 6:15 in the evening, the penthouse door opens without warning. Sofia does not turn immediately. She knows the sound of Aleandro's footsteps, the measured, deliberate way he moves through space, as if always calculating angles and distances. 3 months have passed since they last saw each other. It was a conscious separation, something they had discussed carefully in the weeks after Diana Whitfield's federal indictment. Aleandro had said, "You need to build your life without my shadow falling across it." Sofia had said, "I need to believe I can survive without you." He had kissed her forehead and left, and the absence had been like a door closing between 2 rooms of the same house. "You didn't call ahead," Sofia says, still facing the window. "I know," Aleandro replies, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I should have." She turns. He stands in the doorway still wearing his charcoal overcoat, the cashmere one that probably costs more than her monthly mortgage. His dark hair is silvered at the temples, and the scar running from the outer corner of his left eye to his cheekbone catches the last light of day. At 52, he looks exactly like what he is, a man who has survived things that should have broken him, and who has chosen to carry that survival in his shoulders and his hands. "Come in, then," Sofia says. Aleandro crosses the penthouse and stands beside her at the window, not touching, just present. The city spreads below them, indifferent to the weight of silence between two people who have learned to speak in the spaces where words do not reach. "I have wanted to tell you something," Aleandro says, "for a very long time. I have rehearsed it in my car, in my office, at 3 in the morning when sleep refused to come. And now that I am standing here, the words feel insufficient." Sofia waits. She has learned that silence is sometimes the most generous thing one person can give another. "I watched you on that day," Aleandro continues, "from the window of my study. You stood between Emma and a man twice your size, and your body did not move. Not because you were brave, though you were. Not because you were unafraid, you were terrified. But because love is sometimes louder than fear, and your daughter mattered more than your own survival. I watched that, and something in my chest, something I thought had calcified 30 years ago, cracked open like glass." Sofia's breath catches. She turns to look at him fully. "I have spent my entire life building an empire on the assumption that power means control," Aleandro says. "That strength means being untouchable. That safety comes from making others afraid of you. But you stood there with $5 in your pocket and no weapon except the willingness to be hurt, and you were more powerful than any man I have ever met. You remind me that the strongest people are not those who destroy, but those who choose to protect. Who choose to stay. Who choose love when staying costs everything. Why are you telling me this now?" Sofia asks, though she already knows. Some truths take time to become words. "Because," Aleandro says, "I am tired of pretending you do not matter to me. I am tired of living as though we exist in separate rooms. I am tired of being strong when what I want is to be understood." He reaches for her hand. His palm is warm, and his fingers are steady, and when he interlaces them with hers, Sofia feels something settle into place, not a conclusion, but a beginning. The beginning of something chosen rather than endured. Something built rather than imposed. "What happens now?" Sofia asks. "Now," Aleandro says, "we decide together." Outside, the city glows with 10,000 lights. Inside, two people who have survived separate hells find something like peace in the space between them, in the deliberate choice to stop running. Downstairs, in the security office on the 3rd floor, Vinny and Gino monitor the building's perimeter with the quiet efficiency of men who have protected this man for 20 years. When Vinny sees the two figures at the window, silhouetted against the lights of the city, he reaches over and squeezes Gino's shoulder. Neither man speaks. They have witnessed many things in the name of loyalty, but they have never seen Aleandro Valenti stand that way with another person, present, vulnerable, choosing. Some people are taught that power is about taking. About controlling. About making others afraid of you. But the truest power is knowing when to use everything you have to stand between the defenseless and the dark. Sofia Harper did not need to be saved. She had already saved herself every day for 8 years by choosing to survive, by counting $3.47 and deciding that Emma was worth fighting for, by standing in a garage and refusing to break even as Douglas Hale raised his fists. She simply needed someone to finally see her. And when Aleandro Valenti looked down from that mansion window and saw a mother's body shielding her child, he did not see a poor maid or an invisible woman. He saw the same courage his own mother had shown when she protected him from his father's rage. He saw the person he was meant to choose, and he made a decision that would reshape his entire world. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is strength, that invisible people matter, that the storm does not last forever. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story of courage, power, and justice. Comment below, what would you have done in Sofia's position? Let's talk about it. The closing shot holds on Sofia's face as she smiles, no longer afraid, no longer invisible, no longer running, finally home. And as the city lights flicker below, we understand that some endings are really just beginnings waiting to be lived.